This week's episode was brought to you by Brandon Holiday. Thank you, Brandon Holiday. It's with the generous support of listeners just like you that we here at The Whole Rabbit continue digging away at holes too narrow for normal humans, specialized equipment, or camels, penetrating into subterranean domains where the amphibious overclass convenes to write sitcoms and plan out global events with direct overwatch from the disembodied entities made present through synchronized high doses of intravenous DMT and fried calamari made of human foreskins, which renders them too intoxicated to realize in time that we stole the Shroud of Turin from the sushi bar. If you'd like to help us keep the Shroud of Turin safe from teriyaki stains, or just hear the second half of this episode, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of at least $5 will not only get you the second half of this episode, but the second half of every single one of our episodes, which is guaranteed to make your brain go wow. If you order right now, I'll send you a 5x5 high-quality vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny Baphomet cover art at no additional cost. But not only that, you'll get the secret keys to our Discord server, where you can talk with the whole Rabbit gang about Egyptian deities, nacho recipes, or which books are best at helping the reader accomplish a full transformation into a werewolf. It can happen. If you enjoy the show and would like to support the arts, then please consider giving us a like, subscribe, or share on your social media platform of choice. Just do it on an account where your boss won't see, especially if your boss works for the amphibians in accounting. In this week's episode, we're joined in Socratic seminar by Julian the Philosopher, as he carries the torch of wisdom from the ancient world to the present, breaks bread with us, and discusses everything from the spiritual convictions of Pythagoras to the Platonic solids, the nature of the demiurge, and why Socrates was a base Chad. In the extended show, we explode into conversation about Aleister Crowley, Thelema, the Book of the Law, but also the Tetractys, the Tetragrammaton, and how Nietzsche wanted to overthrow not just the backworlders, but the whole philosophical framework underpinning all of Western society. It's very exciting. Thank you, and enjoy the show. How do you get a philosophy student off your porch?
How?
How?
Thank him for the pizza.
Oh.
I don't get it.
One man's trash is another man's treasure is a great philosophy, but a lousy way to tell a kid they're adopted.
Oh, no.
You don't play off other guys' save files.
Savage. Last night I went to a comedy and philosophy convention.
Yeah?
Yeah, I laughed more than I thought.
I like that one.
I just aced my philosophy test.
Oh?
The question was, what is the central question of epistemology? I answered, how should I know? She's laughing.
That was a good one.
You can't hear it, but she's laughing. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just inform you about the grim fate awaiting your mortal soul should you make even the slightest error reciting one of the 42 negative confessions before the Lord of the Underworld. Nay, we put on our robes and wizard hats and disembark for the unholy field of beans to commence a secret meeting between the Barrel Bunny High Command and their honored guest, Julian the Philosopher. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as the Hack Rabbit. I'm joined this week by our active duty co-hosts, the wonder dog of the multiverse, Mari Sama.
Awoo, awoo, awoo.
The twisted wick of the West, Heka Astra.
Hello.
Are you still tired from talking about my aunt?
I love my aunt, but I'm going to take a back seat on this one because I talked too much the last few.
Aw. Well, I'm pretty sure it doesn't otter.
Tim, the turtle-shelled tyrant thrasher hacker. That's the last name, Hacker.
Hello, I am a renegade sentient AI. I will destroy the human race.
And of course, Tim, who hooked us up with our special guest this week, the man who is bringing the love of wisdom to the masses, Julian the Philosopher. Welcome to the show, Julian the Philosopher. It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate that. Been waiting for this a long time.
Yeah, welcome on board.
Welcome.
So I guess when
Thank you.
Tim found you, you. You were lecturing to a big crowd of people, and he snagged you for his show on Cryptic Chronicles. You guys had a great conversation, and then you were willing to come over and talk to us on our show. So this is great. Can you tell us a little bit about where we can find you if you enjoy this conversation and hear more of your work?
So I basically right now I'm on Facebook and I'm also writing on Medium. So I have a collection of articles on there. If you're interested, I can provide the links afterwards. And I'm also trying to get in-person philosophy lectures going, like live ones. So kind of like a Pythagorean Platonic session going to continue the dialogue.
Awesome.
He also has a YouTube channel.
Yes, very undersubscribed YouTube channel, I might add.
Not for long.
Links in the description.
Hopefully.
Check his stuff out. Click the links. How did you get inspired to want to share classical philosophy, I guess you could call it, with the masses? What made you want to get out there and get the conversation going?
I think that it was when you start your philosophy education, you become acquainted early on with Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And I think that although there are a lot of advantages to the traditional route, I think that there's also another aspect of philosophy that we have to consider, which is the Pythagorean pre-Socratics. And I think that it's important that this kind of education that we have, for example, is multidimensional. So students need to get a classical education, and the English students, the history students, and the classicists need to get a STEM education so that we can cross-reference each other and we can kind of work off each other's song sheets together in a kind of music of the spheres kind of way.
You're preaching to the choir. I love that idea. This show I've made fun of because you could almost just not call it the whole rabbit and just call it Plato's the Timaeus, because I don't know how many things we've talked about where we just go straight back to the Timaeus, whether it's Platonic solids or the demiurge or archons, or even how the elites see education itself. And
Yep. I can definitely see a connection there for sure. I mean, especially in the first one, we talked about how Timaeus was the book under the arm of Plato in that famous Raphael depiction in the Vatican, that it's actually the Timaeus under his arm. So it's a rather important book in history as well.
are you talking about the School of Athens?
Yeah, under his arm in the School of Athens mural in the Vatican. It's
Nice.
actually the book with Timaeus under his arm, not the
Oh.
Republic or the Symposium, which you would
Shut
expect.
up.
And it's very significant. It's very significant because everything was chosen very significantly. They argued over the depictions of everybody in all of these things. So it was a very significant choice that Raphael made
Wow.
to depict him in this way.
You're blowing my mind. Because
It's just a picture of the whole rabbit.
no, it's a synchronicity. Because I used to throw mountain parties, and I made it an absolute point to have a print of the School of Athens at the bonfire because I thought it was great vibes. And as my life has progressed, I've fallen in love with this mural, this painting. I had no clue, bro, that that's the book. I never thought to look. I didn't know that. You just blew my mind. And because they give you the Timaeus in high school, they're like, read it. It's like super boring. You know what I mean? And I wish they would just tell you, like, did you like The Matrix? If you liked The Matrix, we're going to talk about the Timaeus now. They should just dedicate like a whole semester to it, in my opinion, because it's like foundational. So many ideas we have in our culture, you can trace back to the Timaeus. Like one thing we talk a lot about when the Athenians went to Egypt, the Egyptians were like, yeah, every time it rains, you guys forget your history. It's really sad. You guys should be proud of being Athenians. You were the ones that
Yeah,
defeated the
definitely.
Atlanteans.
Yeah, I was gonna say Atlantis is also one of the foundational stories, and it's the Timaeus and the Critias are actually meant. Those two books from the Republic are meant to be read together. So the Timaeus is supposed to be read first, and then the Critias is supposed to be read after it in that order. But kind of so for the first book, the Timaeus is more about. It talks about Atlantis. It also talks about the demiurge, which is actually the demiurge that Plato's talking about is not the Gnostic demiurge. It's the Hermetic demiurge, which would be more in line with the Egyptian cosmology and pantheon. And then I don't know if the pantheon is the right word for the Egyptian gods. I guess that would be more of a Greek Roman classification, perhaps. But yeah, I would definitely say that the Critias is actually a description of Atlantis and of the fall of Atlantis and a couple other very specific details about it. So it really ties in together to give you the whole picture.
Okay, so everybody knows that the Gnostic demiurge is like the biggest dick in the universe. What is the difference between the Hermetic demiurge and the Gnostic demiurge?
Okay, so with Hermeticism, it's a really hard reconstructive effort that we're dealing in because we don't actually have, like, a lot of the texts that we have been translated and retranslated. Like, for example, a lot of the texts have gone through the Byzantine filter, and then a lot of them have also gone through other historical and linguistic translations in order to make its way to us. So I think that there's a lot of questions about the origin. So I don't want to sit here and tell you exactly what it is, but basically the idea is that the demiurge in Greek refers to a craftsman in a literal translation, and the demiurge is not a demonic figure, even though it sounds like it in English. It's basically just a version of a craftsman. So the Hermetic demiurge would be a kind of craftsman entity that sort of emanates from the source code that is the one above all. And the one above all sort of is the Hermetic demiurge, who is sometimes associated with the sun as well. And the Hermetic demiurge is the one that constructs the physical world on behalf of the one above all, but it's kind of like an emanation of it. So you see kind of the construction implements and the kind of building blocks of Hermeticism at the beginning, because you kind of see like the Sophia demiurge, you can kind of see some of those building blocks being constructed early on. But yeah, the Hermetic demiurge is actually a morally good, or at least morally ambivalent. Like, we don't really discuss the morality of the demiurge the way that the Gnostics are very concerned with, like a Cartesian evil genius type of creator, whereas this one is kind of a morally good one that Plato's not concerned with, really.
It's like a 3D printer.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning that the Hermetic demiurge would be closer to like the Egyptian Neteru version of it. So that would be probably Khnum or Ptah or Atum, right?
Well, I'm not as familiar with the Egyptian stuff. I'm actually learning a lot of it from you guys right now. Like, the only one that I'm really familiar with would be Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus and Mercury and those type of individuals. So, or Mercurius, I guess you would say. So
Yeah, I've had him listening to the Ma'at episodes, FYI.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, I listened to a couple of those because I wanted to get some context before I came in, so I knew what to be ready for.
I'm an Egypt nerd, hands down. So
It's going to be great when we get to Pythagoras too, because Pythagoras ties in all of these things together, including, just for you guys, I just want to do a little research and find out. And there's actually a Gnostic tie-in with Pythagoras as well that we can get into later if you're interested in pulling on that thread.
I'm happy you said what you said, because that has been our understanding as we've explained it on the show thus far, is that the way it's explained in the Timaeus, the demiurge is good. And he's doing good work. In fact, his work is like pretty much as close to perfect as it can get, but it's not perfect because it's not the eternal. It's fashioned from the eternal. And so it has some built-in shortcomings. Like, things are never truly in their full essence as long as they're embodied in the material world, because there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And, you know, like, there's a whole time snake, whereas like things in the realm of the forms or the realm of the good, it's all compressed into like its true essence all in one place. And then when the Gnostics come along, they sort of superimpose like this dismal, grim, like goth poetry over it, where it's like, and I have a lot of empathy for that, and we kind of explore that evolution and like how those are the same and how those are different on the show quite a bit. But it's like, as you said, as far as we know, like the demiurge is like a craftsman who is, it's good, like his creation is good, like it is in the Bible, you know?
Yeah, and anyone who just heard this understands Freemasonry a lot better than they ever thought they did before. Because Freemasonry would be the good Platonic version of the demiurge.
Yeah, and there's also a tie-in where you can actually see Pythagoras tied into all of these mystery schools because of the, I guess you could say, the connection between the Egyptian mystery school, the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, and the Zoroastrian Mithras cults and mystery schools in Babylon and Persia, which contributed to Pythagoras migrating through these traditions and then bringing those traditions with him to Greece afterwards. So there is a direct connection between all of these.
So to dive into that, I think the best place to start is, what was Pythagoras' preoccupation with beans?
So the bean issue is pretty interesting because there's a lot of different myths that are surrounding him, and he's kind of like a mythical figure, almost like Hercules, but then he has like aspects of mathematics, which makes sense as well. But I'd say the most popular thing he has would obviously be his mathematics and his beliefs about reincarnation and the soul. And you can see a tie-in between those. So a lot of beliefs about him thinking that he was afraid of beans. Well, I don't think he was afraid of them. I think it was more like he had a bunch of spiritual beliefs in regards to it that kind of prevented him from, at least at the end of his life, the bean field was actually, they attributed to his death and said he didn't want gone across the bean field. But I think that he wasn't afraid of them. I think there was a couple of different reasons. So in the ancient world, there were some people who were allergic to beans. So there was a preoccupation with them in certain cultures. Like, for example, in Egypt, there actually was a prohibition against eating these beans as well.
They were considered dirty. They're bad.
Yeah, the priestly class was against eating the beans. And there was also some kind of enzyme deficiency in the Mediterranean, which I think that is possible that he was also allergic to them, or that some of the people were allergic to him. And that could have explained why the Egyptian priestly class was so against them. So perhaps he picked up this aversion to the fava beans there. But then there's also the account of Diogenes, who said actually he suggested a far more reasonable earthly explanation, which was that he believed that it was just flatulence and that he just didn't want that in his life, that it was just purely dietary. There wasn't no like mythical explanation to it. And I believe sometimes some of these stories are apocryphal. Like there's a lot of stories about him that make him sound like a mythical character rather than a real human being. So it's hard to really understand. But then there's also a tie-in too with democracy as well, because in Greece, beans were used to cast your votes like ballots.
Yeah.
And Pythagoras was anti-democratic. The same way that Plato was as well, right? Because the democracy killed Socrates. So you have this like Platonic strain of criticism of the democracy that runs through Pythagoras, through Socrates and Plato, all the way through. You could have seen it kind of from a metaphorical perspective, but then you could also see it from like a spiritual perspective. So he had many different reasons basically to avoid the beans.
I would suspect around this time in the ancient world that not just flatulence, but if there's more than that as well. This is like a time that hygiene was more difficult. Like they couldn't just hop and take a shower. And if there were public bathhouses as well, right? So you wouldn't really be allowed to like clean yourself in a public bathhouse with that. So I don't know if that might have played into it. I'm just hypothesizing at this point. But scent was also incredibly important for Egypt and Greece.
I think scent was related to the soul.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to be farting all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm channeling a nutritionist listener right now who's telling me, technically everybody is allergic to beans. Humans were not made to eat them. That's why you fart. That's why you have to boil the like weird white stuff off of them when you cook them. So humans were not meant to eat beans. I said it.
Some people have more severe reaction than just farting. And like, if your methodology of cleaning is a public bathhouse, they're not going to let you in.
Yeah, I didn't ask to see that, did I?
Let's be real, though. The democracy and being against it is the most satisfying answer I've ever heard. So thank you, Julian. That is the truth for me now.
Well, beans are also like they have connections to the underworld.
Yeah, I'm thinking Jack and the Giant Beanstalk. I'm also thinking sensu beans from Dragon Ball Z. Like there's beans throughout the occultism and magical thinking, I guess you could say. The ties run deep there.
Yeah, basically in every culture in different ways.
I've staked my entire career on Jack and the Beanstalk secretly being about Anunnaki or the Enochian giants or something. I'm convinced of it, utterly.
Well, beans look like the pineal gland.
I think it's the yod of the Tetragrammaton. Don't get me started.
So I just thought maybe you could touch on around what time this was in history for people who aren't familiar.
You mean the life of Pythagoras, we mean?
Yes.
Okay, so I think he lived around 600 to 500 BC.
Damn, that's like forever ago.
Yeah, that would have placed him long before Plato and Alexander the Great. And so he would not be a contemporary of them, but they would have heard of him because he was one of the most famous people of the area. And he was also one of the first people to call themselves a philosopher and to operate in this particular way that he did. That was very influential.
So I think most people, when they're introduced to Pythagoras, it's to learn how to calculate a hypotenuse.
Yeah,
But-
a squared plus b squared equals c squared.
And that's where a lot of people's understanding of Pythagoras ends. But his interest in geometry wasn't just to torture ninth graders. It had something to do with the soul, presumably, right?
Yes, and we also have to remember that Plato's Academy also had rules about who was allowed to partake. And one of the rules was that you had to study geometry. And geometry, we kind of touched on this earlier, but you asked me, why is it that there is 5 Platonic solids and not 6? And I think that one of the reasons why they studied these issues is because they used math as a way to formulate the earliest versions of human logic, because 2 + 2 = 4, and you could use that to derive certain other kinds of truth in a mathematical sense. So eventually we went from using math to describe reality to math is reality. And Pythagoras himself would actually believe, if we are going to use the universal theory of everything that Einstein was trying to create, he actually died before he was able to finish his theory, that Pythagoras would have said that all is math. And I like to collect and kind of study different philosophers and try and figure out what their universal theories of everything is. So you'll have certain different philosophers like Heraclitus, who would have believed that the fundamentals of life were change and fire or flux. And you would have others like Thales of Miletus, who would have said that all is water. Yep. And then you would have Empedocles, who believed that there were 4 elements that we'd be familiar with: earth, fire, water, air, and the 2 elements of love and strife. And, as I said, Pythagoras believed that all is math. And then his version of math was actually that the universe was a song, and that the math of the universe was the eternal music of the spheres, which he called the Musica Universalis.
How? Oh my God, it's like the Lord of the Rings.
I was going to say that. I didn't know how to. That's the only class I've ever flunked out of when I was really trying my best, and it's music class. And I love the meme where it's like all these rocketry students are looking at some physics diagram. The teacher's like, oh, come on, it's not music theory. You know what I mean? Because there's something profound about music in that it's mathematical, but it's also profoundly emotional, and it can convey, how do I even say this? What can music convey that like nothing else can?
Pure magic. It's just pure fucking magic. Yeah.
It's hard to find something more magical than music, and yet it's a harmony of this technical and the spiritual. And on the show, like, we've equated math to like the highest path on the tree of life, the one that connects Kether to Tifereth. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, it is the language of the universe.
It also ties into the Ma'at stuff that we just did.
Ma'at's a big equal sign, at least to me.
Yeah, well, Ma'at is math.
Yeah.
Oh, is she?
Yeah, I went on a side tangent. It was very short, but in one of those episodes, I brought up math.
I forgot about that. That's totally fascinating, though.
That's interesting. I wonder, because Pythagoras came back from Egypt with these theories, so it would make sense that there's kind of like a migration of ideas that went along with the people as well, because people bring with them their ideas, and then those ideas matriculate down into the belief systems of Western civilization. So I like to think of Western civilization as, a lot of people use the dichotomy of Athens and Jerusalem, which I definitely say are extremely relevant, but I'd say there's more of like a triforce of Egypt and Jerusalem and Athens together kind of are the alchemical mixture which produce Western civilization.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here on that one.
I think I specifically brought it up in relation to the symbolism of the sickle hieroglyph, because math etymologically is rooted in meaning to mow grass, and it's very Saturnian. And basically anything that is created is also able to be destroyed or harvested. So it's kind of caught up in the symbolism of Ma'at's hieroglyph. So it's interesting because it's not opposed to what it is that you're talking about.
And in like all of our research that we've done over the years prior to this podcast, during this podcast, we realized that it all goes back to Egypt.
All roads lead to Egypt, and the way they used to say all roads lead to Rome.
Yeah, what's that old saying? How like 99% of magic is in Egypt, and that pissed off Israelites? I forget.
I think it makes everyone angry.
Do you know what I'm talking about, though? I totally forgot the quote.
Monopolization, like a spiritual monopoly complex.
Well, it was like something along the lines of Israel prophet guy or something was like, oh, magic is real. It just sucks because 95% of it comes from Egypt. I don't remember the exact quote. Don't quote me.
Well, to bring it back to what we're talking about, it was not Egypt that got me into magic. I was reading Brian Greene's The Elegant Universe and trying to learn about M theory and string theory, and it became evident to me. I was like, the universe has to be magic somehow. Like, I don't know how or what. I hadn't really read I had read the Timaeus, but not since high school. I knew that there was something magical about the universe, and for some reason, the thing that stuck in my craw was the Platonic solids. Because why are there 5? Like, it's hard baked into the universe. There are 5 platonic solids, not 4, not 6. And I thought this was utterly fascinating because for someone who was interested in magic but didn't know where to start, the idea that I knew for a fact there were 5 platonic solids. So I thought that was a good start to whatever I went to next, right? And so much of magic is wrapped up in the pentagram, which of course has a 5ness to it. But the more you dig into the pentagram, you find, of course, the phi ratio. And where's the phi ratio? Pretty much everywhere in the whole universe. And so there's this theory that, like, okay, maybe spirits exist. So if I'm going to interact with spirits, how do I do that? Well, you read long enough into these texts and it's like, well, part of getting these spirits to obey is using the pentagram. And you scratch your chin and you're like, why? Well, I think it has something to do with the phi ratio, etc.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because I think Pythagoras was discovering the fallen or lost city of math, kind of like the lost city of Atlantis, rather than creating math. It's like math predates humanity. It's the poetry of reality itself. And there's a lot of people who believe that it is the language through which the universe speaks as well. So that's why when you can speak the language of math, you can speak the language of the universe.
That makes a lot of sense. What did you mean by city of math? When I began my studies, I kept hearing about Atlantis. And the more I read, the less it seemed like a physical place and the more it seemed like an abstraction of something else.
You could look at it a couple of different ways. And the thing about Plato and the Republic is that it's significantly layered like Shrek's onion. So there's so many different layers to go through. Like you could read it metaphorically, you could read it literally. And then when you go back to it, I always get so many other levels to it. So basically you could look at Atlantis like, you know, Plato's cave of the allegory, like the shadow cave. Sometimes people would say the cave of the allegory, the one in which people are inside it, you know, looking at the wall with the shadows on it and believing that's reality. That thought experiment or example, some people think that it's real and some people think that it's not. And I would say that's equivalent to the Atlantis example. Some people think that it is a literal account that was shared, and some of them think that it's a thought experiment similar to the shadow cave.
So Atlantis is an ogre. Got it.
Yeah.
I love Shrek's
An
onion,
onion.
by the way. That's my favorite thing about art and life is Shrek's onion, as you stated. It.
That's what I was thinking about when I wrote the article about the geometry of the soul. I started thinking about it. I was like, well, if we're talking about fava beans, then we're also using, you know, the onion. It's kind of like the layers of reality, or we're using fruit metaphors to discover the cosmos.
Well, fruit have a lot of geometry in them.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I think everything that's created is encoded with that mathematics. The mathematics of that, I believe it's almost like a signature of creation, that it always comes with things that are manifest or in physical reality. It all has a stamp of that perfected math. I'm also a huge fan of like Plato's plane of what is it?
The realm of the forms.
Yeah. Yeah, that everything's
Oh,
based
yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Man, I got like 8 of these little new shapes.
So, but the fact that is that when things are generated or made, it has to filter down through that. So that's why everything is made up of math. It's the universal language of creation.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, when you said that, it made me think of like a watermark on the memes of reality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like a watermark. That's perfect.
There is a tie-in between Pythagoras. I know people usually make the tie-in between Plato's allegory of the shadow cave and make that analogy between that and modern technology and screens and people inside believing that fiction is reality and stuff like that. And usually that would be the illusion. But you could also look to Pythagoras when he said that all is math. You could actually take that as him pointing directly to the simulation argument or a form thereof. Because if all is math, then that would also say that all is a form of a simulation, or that reality is some kind of binary computer coded simulation of some sort. Because if math can explain it and math can articulate it, then math must be a fundamental building block of reality. And that kind of does push forward the simulation theory, and it kind of does lend itself to Gnosticism in a way, although I've never seen a lot of other people make that direct connection between Pythagoras and Gnosticism. I'm going to make that connection if other people don't.
Yeah.
Mathematically, it's almost impossible. We don't live in some sort of simulacrum.
And, you know, it may not even have to be binary at this point. Like, we understand the quantum to such a degree that that there might be a tertiary variable. There might be 4 variables, but whatever we've produced with mathematics has accurately predicted anything that we've discovered, if you notice that. The foundations of the actual discovery is usually found within mathematics before it's actually discovered in a hard physical, location.
I think maybe part of the problem is that as soon as you say simulation, people think that it is conceptually opposed to reality. Like,
this is reality. No, it is.
Well, see, that's the thing. If we go back to the Timaeus, the demiurge is fashioning this from the eternal, so the eternal would be reality.
yeah, but the eternal is also made into reality. So that's the whole idea behind the quintessence, is that it's carried forward into the reality. So
That's very Egyptian.
it presents a bit of a dichotomy of the simulation also being reality.
But we're a simulation of the higher reality. We're not the full-fledged
Yes,
thing.
exactly.
But we're a shadow representation of that. In shadow is a perfect word, because it's if you look at your shadow, or if you're making shadow puppets to tell a story, there's still form there, but it's not your hand, it's not your body. It's a shadow of that. So in my opinion, this reality that we live in, the physical things we touch, is but a shadow of the higher realms where, actual reality may reside. But it's funny from this perspective that looks like ghosts and gods and made up things, but it's not. Those are almost realer than the things that you can touch in real life.
That's the whole idea behind alchemy, right? Is to reveal the divine that is within it. So, and it goes through a whole process of it. At some point in time, I think by the actual end of the process, if you ever reach it, you come to realize that it was in there in the first place. So you don't actually need to kill the thing to see it.
And the deeper you go, quarks, atoms, all that crap, the more empty everything gets.
Or you fall so far down the simulation rabbit hole that you become like a super depressed Gnostic.
Which I think is wrong.
Yeah, it's true. I would say that Hermeticism and actually Stoicism, surprisingly, although people usually think of Stoicism, they think of a very dull, kind of gray philosophy. If you were going to say what color Stoicism is, you'd probably say some type of metallic gray color. That in reality, they are very positive metaphysics in reality in comparison to Gnosticism, because Stoicism believes fundamentally that all the good tools that you require, all the components to live a good life, are here on this earth in this life for us today, and that we can apprehend these goods in this life. And the same thing with Hermeticism, that the demiurge is fundamentally good and that the one above all is fundamentally good, and we live in a good universe, that although negative things exist, that's kind of like in a Jungian sense, you need the shadow in order to see the light. So the fact that the problem of evil exists shouldn't necessarily make you believe that, unless some people grapple with the problem of evil and find it incompatible with their own metaphysics, like how could evil exist in a world where the creator is fundamentally good? So it does kind of make you believe the Hermeticists and the Stoicists, might actually be the most positive philosophies that we have access to.
Yeah, when it comes down to it, you got to see it from the macrocosmic perspective and the microcosmic perspective. The microcosmic perspective, at face value, since we're evolved to look at things negatively for evolutionary advantage to survive, can seem kind of depressing if you can't break out of it. But from the macrocosmic perspective, everything is beautiful and in balance.
Well, that's the thing, is we are manifest in a physical world. Part of that manifestation has to do with duality. You can't have cold without knowing what hot is. You can't have black without knowing what white is. You can't have up without down, because there's no meaning to it if there's not an opposite that actually exists alongside it. So, people who achieve
little Miss Taoist.
People who achieve enlightenment or peer into this other, more true reality, I think part of that is taking the step into non-dualism, as in seeing that there is a third option. There's a way to rise up out of the duality and into another level of reality.
I mean, that's the use of free will, right? Because it's not love if you don't have the free will.
Correct. There's no meaning to it.
I think we've also got to understand the context in which Gnosticism arose as well, because you have to remember that after the Egyptian priests were removed by the Persians around the time that Egypt was invaded, when Pythagoras was studying in Egypt, Egypt was attacked and invaded by the Persian army, and they took over, and they were still there all the way until Alexander the Great took over. So there was kind of a rebirth or a renaissance era of Egyptian mysticism that took place once the Greeks took over. And then after that, the Egyptian priestly class was kind of depreciated and not funded as well afterwards. So after the Roman era. So you can kind of see how a faith in the old institutions of power were falling apart, and that would have also contributed to the context in which the Gnostics view their reality. So the Greeks had a much more positive metaphysics in some ways because they were within the golden era, so they were experiencing the best that Athens had to offer, versus the Gnostics, who were experiencing kind of a devolution, you could say, in the Gnostic and Egyptian traditions due to a multitude of factors, like the Romans defunding certain temples, but then also other belief systems like Christianity beginning to rise up, which took a lot of those levers away. So there becomes a lot of different pull factors historically and theologically and philosophically, which would have drawn people away from the old systems. And I think that Gnosticism kind of presents itself kind of like a theological identity crisis in a kind of way, like trying to figure out who we are and what we represent in a world where we can't really understand the epistemological foundations.
Yeah, exactly. Like after Christianity started to rise, you can see that there was a very real like cognitive dissonance, both spiritually and psychologically, all connected within like the collective unconscious. How could this God who's supposed to be all good do all this shit in the past? And how can you like connect that to like the evil in the world that was obviously way more prominent back then in the ancient times?
Yeah, I think the problem of evil definitely it ebbs and flows with history. I believe that when times are good, people aren't as concerned with philosophy and the problems of evil. And then when times are bad, everyone gets more concerned with it. And it makes sense because the closer you are to danger, the more you're thinking about mortality.
Yeah, and the cognitive dissonance was real because, I mean, it makes sense why the ancient Gnostics, went about what they did. Like when you're trying to break down the Old Testament, it's like, holy crap, this God is like telling us to do genocide in Canaan, telling us to cut tips of our kids' dicks off. Like, what the fuck is going on here? How is this God holy?
Christianity is very much a Gnostic abreaction to what was there before. And the parts of Gnosticism that worked, became what's active in Christianity today, in my opinion. So
yeah.
In my life, I could jump from seeing the universe more like the Greeks and then suddenly hop over to like Gnosticism or Philip K. Dick and just see it as like the Black Iron Prison. And I think part of the mission on this show is to give people a space to think about that and to square the balance between those two things. I think there's a lot of truth between both perspectives. And I love what you said about historical context matters, because we're living in an era today where all the Abrahamic faiths really seem bloodthirsty against each other, at least the parts that are visible. There's always like the silent majority, which just loves peace and food, right? But, if you were to step back, it certainly seems like the Abrahamic faiths all have like 3 different gods and like they all hate each other, but it's like, isn't it supposed to be the same God? Like, so it's really easy to be like, well, that demiurge just loves to watch people get burned alive, and I don't know why that is. And then for some reason you see how the most powerful people in our world, the people who make the big decisions, because the way our system is set up, it tends to favor sociopaths. So we have a bunch of sociopaths in power, and it's really easy to imagine them as being in league with archons, or being in league with a despotic, tyrannical force that does everything it does to, keep us in chains in the back of Plato's cave, watching dumb stuff on Fox News.
In my State of the Union, or my speech to the nation, whatever you want to call it,
and thinking that's reality. It's really easy to draw that straight line. But then you walk outside the cave and you're like, oh, butterflies and daisies and shit. Whoever made this is really good, And so...
Well, it's also interesting to look at the different psychological perspective on morality that the ancients had, because if you think about it, before Christ, the world was about might is right. Whereas after Christ, the world was about how you play the game. And that paradigm shift changed not only Western civilization, but the Middle East as well.
I would argue that the paradigm shift from metaphysics to morality actually took place around the time of Socrates. And you could argue that Socrates was the first to bring philosophy down from the stars and give it directly to the people and make it accessible for average people. Because before that, Pythagoras ran a very exclusive school, and he talked about math and he talked about complex metaphysics. In comparison, Socrates didn't really talk as much about cosmology, and he talked a lot more about morality, which is a lot more accessible to the average person. So I'd say that the beginnings of the difference, and I would say Friedrich Nietzsche also brought this up as well, the transition from the Dionysian to the Apollonian is an extremely important aspect of Greek society, where we transition from the Greek Homeric hero to Socrates, who is the hero of the soul and the hero of the intellect. So it's the triumph of the logos over the Homeric hero.
Yeah, I agree. And like the people of the ancient world, especially from the Hebrew perspective, they would not have seen that old school God as evil at all, because that's how you kept people in line back then. Like you had to be hardcore and crazy. Nobody would respect you otherwise. And if we know anything about like Middle Eastern spiritual traditions, the Hebrews were basically the inheritors of all of them and just mushed it all together into an amalgamation.
Yep. And you also have to remember something else too, that there is a fundamental difference between the pre and post-Christian world in terms of the way that they view reality. So the Greeks would have seen the world through the lens of the Homeric myths. And I think it was Hesiod, a poet, who wrote about Pandora's box. So Pandora's box was the mythical item where all the bad things in the world were, which escaped from. And basically the last thing that escaped out of Pandora's box was hope. So in the Greek system, hope was not considered a virtue. And the virtues were the most important aspects of Socrates' belief system within the realm of wisdom and virtue and the cultivation of the good life and a good soul that basically...
Are you saying hope is a lie?
Well, I'm saying that from a Greek perspective, they were very pessimistic. And you might say the reason they were pessimistic is because the gods that they associated with were
petty and cruel. I've seen Hercules.
Yeah, so they were it was a little bit of a different world. They had a reasonable amount of pragmatism, let's say, in the ancient world. And then by the time Christianity shows up, we get a very different view of metaphysics and morality, where Christianity introduces the concepts like perpetual peace, which didn't exist in a Roman or Greek environment where their gods were in the business of warfare. So
and that's why the Romans hated them so much, dude, was because it's such like it turned their entire worldview on its head, where they gave the power to the people who were small, where they gave the power to the people who were meek, who were holy, who were good. Before that, those people didn't matter. They were just a casualty number.
Yeah, Nietzsche had that exact problem. He actually disliked intensely Plato, and he viewed Plato as his direct competition, and he wanted to displace Plato and Socrates as the most important characters in Western civilization. And let's be clear, Plato might be the most significant philosopher in Western civilization, perhaps the most significant individual in Western
Neoplatonism, dude. Neoplatonism is like all over our society, even now, even if people don't know what it is, even if people deny it.
So even The Matrix, like we were saying earlier, I mean, it's one of the most popular film franchises of the modern information era, and it feeds directly into these concepts we're elucidating here.
What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage. Born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch.
Hell yeah. It's just has always been so trippy to me is how the ancient world, their morality is so different than ours. Like if we think of the word virtue to the ancient Romans, like the word virtus, same word basically, mean totally different things. Like to us, it means being good, doing what's right, not banging every hooker you see, maybe just one once in a while. But to the Romans, it was like, nah, dude, virtue is you're a strong ass motherfucker who can fight. You're brave. You'll die for your beliefs. virtuous. That's virtue. And like, it's just such a paradigm switch. It's crazy. And it happened all within 2 centuries.
You can see the Stoic values that would have been required, the kind of individuals, maybe perhaps not the Platonic values of the philosopher king, but in the sense of the myth of the metals, you would need silver-souled individuals. You would need Stoics in order to run an empire of the size, scale, and power and intensity of the Roman Empire, which was very different than the functionaries required to run something like a Greek polis, Sparta, or Athens. It would be a very different kind of dynamic where you're running a polytheistic, multi-faith empire like the Roman Empire. You'd basically have to administer multiple regions, and it would make more sense for Stoicism rather than the Greek system, which worked more for a homogenous group of individuals who shared a belief system. So you can kind of see how the Stoic values of the Romans, and they basically took the aspects of Socrates and Zeno that they appreciated, and they adapted them to serve the empire.
All of that stuff you just said was way smarter than my comment, but I see like how the difference in the word virtue versus the past versus now, it's more of a mental fortitude now than it was back then. Back then it was like a physical fortitude and a ability to have discipline of the physical variety, rather than now it would be considered a mental discipline to have virtue.
Yeah.
Virtus would be strength.
Yeah, I would say, and if you think about these individuals as well, if you actually consider Plato and Socrates, these people were not weaklings, although they're often depicted as very old people.
They're
in
nerds.
reality, Socrates fought in the wars against the Persians, and Plato was actually a bodybuilder. So the idea that, Plato is flexing on all the sophists essentially, and he definitely, these people were not weaklings physically or mentally. So the concepts of virtue were tested at the origin point of courage. So you needed the courage of your convictions, and that courage could be translated into both intellectual practices as well as physical strength.
And you had to be willing to die for them. If you look at how much Zoroastrianism, how much Stoicism, how much Mithraism has had influence on Christianity, you see why Christianity is so powerful that it brought down the Roman Empire in a way and has been so prominent for 2,000 years.
Yeah, it's also the centralization of authority within a single figure is very helpful, because once you have this central moral authority to appeal to, it was very easy for them to undermine the Roman Empire, which kind of was in the process of fragmenting, if you realize that after the Tetrarchy, and then you have the fragmentation of the schism, where the East and the West Roman Empire broke apart.
Yeah.
So you basically can see at the same time that Christianity was forming a kind of spiritual unity, the Roman Empire was fracturing into more and more unstable pieces. So it was
if Aurelian was never assassinated, we would be living in a totally different world right now.
See, I really like the character of Aurelian, but then there's also an argument that he made a huge mistake by minting silver coinage, which ended up creating a crazy amount of inflation. So if you actually look into
he the economy for sure. You're right.
Yeah,
because he also didn't allow people to
history,
change they weren't allowed to change any of their professions. So he screwed everything up considering that.
Like in Japan.
No, but he did it for a reason. It was supposed to just be temporary, but you're right. Go on, Julian.
Well, I was just going to say, if you look at the situation, and I remember reading George Orwell recently, a book called Books and Cigarettes, which I definitely recommend to everyone. It's a really short one, but it's like a nonfiction George Orwell book about his life, basically, and a couple of things. And in the story, he basically talks about that as well. He's talking about inflation and complaining about the price of books and cigarettes, basically. It's kind of funny. And you kind of see how, regardless if we're talking about, the ancient Roman world or, 1945 or today, inflation is still the killer of empires.
Yep.
It's funny to portray Socrates as some based Chad in almost the exact way we would explain those terms today.
That's why you see in all those pictures of him, he's always muscular as fuck, even when all his hair is gone and it's all white and stuff. He's got the white long beard. He's like jacked.
You have to remember, he's a hero. Socrates is a hero. He's like he's a super character. He's a superhero. He's basically the hero of the soul. He is the hero of the logos. He is Superman of the mind, if you will.
Well, to bring it full circle, you mentioned something that sounded a bit anti-democratic, because we began by discussing what was Pythagoras' preoccupation with beans. What's this concept of the philosopher king? What does that mean?
So Plato basically had this concept that he believed that there would be no peace on earth until the kings were philosophers and the philosophers were kings. So he believed that in order for a just society to flourish, the leaders would need to be lovers of wisdom and virtue and morality, and they would also need to be educated as well. So it kind of goes back to the beginning, and it's a good tie-in for the beginning of our conversation, where the fully integrated individual must have a classical education as well as a scientific education in order to be a fully integrated individual. And I think that Plato was kind of making an argument for fully integrated individual in an intellectual sense back in the day. So he was kind of arguing for sort of a rule by experts, but it wasn't necessarily a rule by experts. It was more about the most virtuous man rather than the smartest man should lead, or woman in that case.
I love that idea today. We've discussed how the idea of what a liberal education is also comes from Greek culture, because there was this concept of like, oh, we have to make the perfect orator. And for the perfect orator, the orator has to know what they're talking about. So to prepare the perfect orator, they have to learn about every subject they can possibly learn about, enough so they can speak fluently on it. And then that's sort of the framework for how we think about education today. And so I agree fundamentally with your campaign of trying to bring philosophy to the masses, because I think we are living in a time of moral and social decay where that's our antidote, is philosophy and the love of wisdom. And things haven't gone totally south yet. We are still connected through the internet. We can talk, hundreds of miles away from each other and actually discuss philosophy more than we've ever been able to before. And I think what you're doing is admirable. I think this is the part where we invite people to the second half of the show, which is available at www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you the second half of this show, you'll get the second half of every single one of our shows, which goes back over 7 years before the first Death Stranding. And if you sign up right now, I'll send you a 5x5 high quality vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny Baphomet cover art and the secret keys to our Discord server, where you can talk to us at any time, day or night, when I'm not taking care of my mom. And then you can also talk to Julian the Philosopher if he happens to be online and cares to talk to you, which I don't know if he does or will, but we'll
Also, you can join the Cool Socks Club.
get black bagged today in your favorite socks.
He is in the chat.
He is in. I told you this guy was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
I'm really ready for the second half of this conversation. Are you down to hang
Me
out with us
too.
for another hour, Julian?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, we're going to take like a 10-minute break or 15-minute break.
Yeah, so if you want to hang out for that conversation, you got to eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew pew
Pew pew.
pew. Pew, 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 pew. Do you want to say pew pew?
Pew pew.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Whole Rabbit. You are now listening to the extended side of the tape, which means you are a paying member and are contributing to our own little school of Athens.
And you're so cool.
And
for
for that-
real.
And sexy.
We thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And for your price of admission, we have dragged Julian the Philosopher back for the second half of this episode. And I thought it would be pertinent to bring up that we're recording this episode on the 8th of April, which means it is technically Book of the Law Day. This is the day that Aleister Crowley, well, really his wife, we are pretty sure, channeled the Book of the Law. And this would have been Book 1. He channeled Book 1. And why am I bringing this up? Because having looked at a little bit of Julian's writing, one of the things he talks about is the tetractys, which is this spectacular shape that we've discussed how it works in Thelema, because oftentimes when you see the word of the aeon, abrahadabra, it's superimposed over a tetractys or a tetractys-like shape, because I think a tetractys has a limited number, or does it? I don't know. It's basically a series of triangles that are not unlike the Triforce in Legend of Zelda, and I believe that, at least in the Hermetic tradition, you can superimpose the Kabbalistic tree of life on a tetractys. And I have to look it up. I think Tifereth is in the middle, and it like connects to all the other triangles in the tetractys. But anyway, tell us about this tetractys. What did it mean to Plato, and what does it have to do with the human soul?
All right. So getting back to it, I would say that we actually have to bring a much earlier character that feeds into sacred geometry here, and that would be Melchizedek.
Oh, cool.
Melchizedek is basically a priest king of the post-flood era, and he basically is an important biblical character who shows up in the early Bible around the time of Abraham. And he's important because he's showed he kind of just appears out of nowhere with no genealogy and no beginning and no end, basically the way that you would think of in the Bible, and basically, or in the Torah, I should say, in the Hebrew version. So it's the Old Testament. And he basically, not only does he bring out bread and wine, which kind of foreshadows a kind of Christ-like behavior, but he also is tithed to by Abraham after a battle is won. And usually the person that is tithed to is the priest and the higher ranking individual, spiritually speaking. So, and Abraham is kind of like one of the patriarchs of the monotheistic religion. So the fact that Abraham is tithing 10% to Melchizedek says that his order is higher. And it's also significant because Jesus is also said to have been part of the Melchizedek order. And also the person who is said to have been before Melchizedek is Adam, the first man. So Adam is like the first in the order, and then Adam passes down his hours to Melchizedek and Melchizedek to Jesus. So these characters are very biblically related, and then they also show up in the Nag Hammadi library as well. In 1945 in Egypt, the Nag Hammadi library was discovered, and within it they found a lot of fragments of different parchments and scrolls that would basically give you a lot of more Gnostic systems and beliefs, and kind of tied Melchizedek to Gnostic belief systems, and also had some Solomon in there and some other stuff as well. So you kind of get a sense that Melchizedek, in a Hegelian sense, he's important to the beginning, the middle, and the end of Christian eschatology.
I'm being Melchizedek pilled. This is dope. Because we've spoken about books in the Nag Hammadi library and gone into quite depth, but we haven't spoken about Melchizedek yet. That's not a rabbit hole we've gone down. Thank you for clarifying some things. That's awesome. Yeah, until now, Melchizedek is just like one of those people that Doreen Virtue used to channel.
Yeah, he basically is like a pre-Christ figure that's very important in a Hegelian sense. And he also has a significance because of a symbol. And the symbol is called the Tetragrammaton, right? And the Tetragrammaton is essentially, this is where the Pythagorean tie-in is that the Tetragrammaton is not only the name of God, but also the number of God.
Explain.
So
26?
72, I think.
Like the 70 name God.
Like the 72, like the books of Moses, the Shema Farash, like that.
The 72
Yeah,
angels
like-
of the Shem. Not to mention the 72 demonic angels of the Ars Goetia.
We're
Or demonic,
nerds!
I mean, fallen angels. Nephilim spirits, to be 100% correct.
You've fallen into a
It's
den
all
of
the
nerds.
Same thing, man.
So the connection to Pythagoras is basically between the figures of the four numbers. The tetractys basically looks exactly like the Triforce in Link's Awakening or Zelda, right? Where you have like the shape of the triangles, and then those triangles actually represent the base 10 pair in math. So inside that, you can actually get all the other mathematical equations out of. So Pythagoras regarded numbers as the ultimate reality, and the tetractys is a triangle figure consisting of 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 = 10. It symbolizes perfection. It symbolizes the mathematical structure of the universe and material existence. Yeah, it also symbolizes, like I said earlier, the Empedocles formula of the four elements: earth, water, fire, and air. So you can see that Empedocles' theory actually was like brought forward into the future, and you can see how kind of Aristotle also adopted the earth, air, fire, water, you know, the avatar essentially elemental system, and you can see it moving that way. But so the way that I see it is that the Tetragrammaton talks about how they could reduce God's name to a number, and so Pythagoras said all is number. So you can kind of see there's a direct connection there between the math of the universe, and instead of the name of God, it's the number of God.
The all is mind.
So from what I remember,
universe.
the numerical value of the Tetragrammaton Yod He Vav He is 26, which I believe is related to the numerology of the cube, some form or
Not
fashion.
the black cube.
Basically, you can find a lot of math inside it, right? So this is where you get the interesting part about the 5 Platonic solids. You start realizing, so the reason why the Platonic solids are important is because within a 3-dimensional environment, which we inhabit, fourth dimension being time and being a coordinate in physics, the third dimension is the ones that we inhabit in the physical reality. And basically, how do I say this?
The black cube of Saturn.
There's the Saturn connection as well, but it's like the unfolding of the tetractys basically creates the mathematical systems that we have. So it's like all of modern math is like contained within that symbol. Same way that like all of creation is contained within the Tetragrammaton and the words of God. So it's like speaking through symbols, and they're trying to relating these ideas to us in that capacity.
I love the lore about how like the monotheistic Egyptians, when they did like back in the day, what was it? Atom. That is connected to Tetragrammaton and where it was inspired from.
Are you talking about the monotheistic Aten disc?
Yeah, the original one. That is where all that came from, the Tetragrammaton and everything. And not necessarily like the Hebrew version, but just the idea.
You're talking about the heretic king Akhenaten?
Hell yeah.
I'm actually reminded of a hypercube and a cube and a square. Because you start with a square and then you duplicate the square and you join it, and there's 6 sides to it. So you get the 6, and then you unfold it and there's all these more lines and there's still 6 faces and it makes a cross. And
A square, huh? Just like you.
and then a tetragrammaton is like a 3D version of the unfolded cube. So I don't know. I'm seeing the numbers. A hexagon is also related to a cube in a way. And notice that who's missing? The 5. The seed number, which is in between 4 and 6. So I don't know. There's something to the math here. And I like that the language of the name of God transliterates to numbers and vice versa. That's why the tetragrammaton is also a calculation of numbers, because it's meaning in every piece of language we have, and mathematics is the ultimate language.
So hear me out.
Do it.
26 is the sum of the Hebrew characters Yod He, Vav He. And then 26 is the number of elements when you add 6 faces, 12 edges, and 8 vertices to make a cube.
Yes.
Then if you look at the Hebrew language, the way it's divided up into the 3 mother letters, you have a system that looks like a cube. You have the 3 mother letters creating the X, Y, and Z axis. And then you have the 7 being like the 6 faces of the cube with the 1 in the center being 7. And then you have the rest of the 12 letters being the 12 edges.
Also, all of the Hebrew letters have their own numerical value and symbolic meaning.
Oh, okay. And then what you're saying here, Julian, Heck is holding up a diagram to show me. If you put the tetragrammaton into a tetractys where it says Yod, Yod He, Vav, Yod He, Vav He, you add all that up, it creates 72.
Right, yeah. The tetractys is the one that's 72. The 26 is referring to the tetragrammaton.
That makes sense. Well, it's interesting 72 because that's how many degrees at each point to sweep out a pentagram.
Yeah.
All y'all who are listening to this, your brain just doubled in size, FYI, after listening to this episode. You're welcome.
So it basically looks like that inside the tetractys and the tetragrammaton, within these hidden figures, you're kind of seeing the beginnings of algebra kind of form, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. If each one of these figures or symbols is a stand-in or a representative or something else, then it's almost like the occult, right? Like where the occult represents the hidden or the clandestine. Like the meaning hidden behind the words is like algebra, where the true value of the number is hidden behind the representation.
I love what you're saying, dude.
Then we also have to examine what Tim brought up earlier. We have the microcosm and the macrocosm in science, and that refers to as above, so below in Hermeticism. So the as above would be the astrophysics, and the so below would be musical theory to a degree. So like,
Yeah, like
you
octaves
can kind
and
of
shit.
see, yeah, you can kind of see like how, I guess the middle area would be like, I mean, or you could say quantum physics, I guess, would be like the upper world, and the lower world would be the physical realm, I guess, to a degree.
Quantum is lower in regards to us, but
It's also the very big too, right? Quantum's
it also
the very,
reflects
very
the large.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, like anything that's so large, it's like hard to quantify, and anything so small, you had to break it into such small pieces. That's the quanta or the quantum.
Yeah, imagine perceiving less than 1% of reality. That's where we are.
Well, if we shifted positions, the quantum would be a completely different level than us. So it's really relative.
Yeah.
And Einstein has entered the chat.
Spooky action.
I
at a
created the
distance.
bomb. Hans, where are you?
He'd be pretty pissed off if we attributed that to him.
That's true.
Agree.
He still did it though, so fuck
But
him.
you know what's great is like he came up with E equals MC square. He was flabbergasted. He didn't have any ideas, and he went on a walk in nature, and it came to him spontaneously out of nowhere. So even Einstein believed in God. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
He was
knew-
definitely possessed by demons. You're right.
He
Heck.
kn- no,
You're right,
it's not-
Mari. Completely,
not
100%.
demons. It was a eureka moment. It was that moment that something comes from the plane of forms. You get into a state where you can channel that, I guess, universal knowledge down into a
The Nephilim teachings, you're correct. Thank you for clarifying that.
You actually gave me something really interesting to speak about here, just a little bit of a tie-in. Since you said the word eureka, it automatically made me think of the mathematician and physicist Archimedes.
Ooh.
Because the
Didn't he
famous
get
story
shanked by a
about
Roman?
during the Battle of Syracuse, where the Romans were assaulting the city and basically they stormed the city, and they actually wanted Archimedes alive because he had developed these crazy weapons. Like he had this gigantic iron fist that he would be able to drop through ships, basically kind of like a crane with a gigantic iron fist on the end of it, and he would drop it, basically swing it out over the sea and drop it through things. And he would also have, like, he supposedly had all these crazy creations that he used math to create, right? And basically he was on the ground like drawing circles, and the Roman soldier commanded him to come to see the commander, and he said no. And then so the Roman soldier stabbed him, and he got in trouble for that. And his last words were, "Don't disturb my circles."
Fucking
and
nerd.
basically, but it was an accident. That was a huge loss to mathematics and humanity, essentially. But the significance of the Eureka line is actually in relation to water displacement theory. And it was him getting into a bathtub. And when he got into the bathtub himself, he noticed that the level of the water raised significantly. So he put it together that the water displacement theory equations would require, like, you know, the added weight of the person displacing the water, and how he would calculate it thusly. And it really reminded me that water is memory.
Yes.
When we're in the shower, we also have these like epiphanies.
Hell yeah.
Right? You're in the shower and you're like, oh, I'm just thinking about something. And you think that it's just you, but it could be something to do with like some kind of ancient epiphany to do with water. I
Dude.
just have this idea in my head, like a baptism, you know, like an intellectual philosophical baptism almost. Like when you get baptized, why is it that the water basically gives you this like refreshed sense that is deeper than the physical? It's deeper than
Fucking
the material,
magic.
you know?
He screams Eureka, and he is so overwhelmed he runs dripping naked through the streets to the king's palace to report his discovery. Now, what is the moral of this story?
That a breakthrough will come.
Wrong. The point of the story is the wife. You listen to your wife, she will give you perspective, meaning you need a break. You have to take a bath or you will get nowhere. There will be no order, only chaos.
You know, him getting into the bath, it sounds like such a ridiculous thing, almost a Diogenes, like, you know, ridiculous story, but it has such significance if you really think about it.
I think this ties into what we've been talking about with the divine remembering.
How so?
Like he's talking about having an aha moment as being related to the memory of water itself, right? And this is like an aspect of God that you are interfacing with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So this is in line with what we've been talking about as far as remembering. But in Kemetic terms, it was portrayed as like a literal remembering of Osiris's members, right? So we've been talking about this
Well,
kind
the final
of thing.
piece comes from the water.
Yeah.
The aha moment is the
The golden phallus gets thrown into the river and it gets eaten by a fish. And then Isis has to fashion a golden phallus. And this is the creative aspect of it. So I honestly think what you're describing is exactly in line with the stuff that we've been talking about.
I was just going to say, like, with meditation, like, I meditate every day. I have since 2014, like, without ever failing to do so. But my meditations that I have in the shower, like, not even trying to meditate, are, like, way more powerful than my, like, serious meditations.
It's like the water itself is a component of memory, and it wakes something up inside us, like, it connects us to something real, but also like a past memory, you know? Like,
Intuition,
it's almost
dude.
like the water
It's
itself is like a it's like the flow and ebb of reality.
It's intuition. It's like you said, it's almost a collective memory or a memory of something beyond the physical. But intuition is part of that. And water is also likened to the emotional state of your personhood. So emotions flow like water, right? But so does your attention. And if you can put your emotions at ease and relax and meditate, which water helps facilitate that in a lot of people, you can get into this connected, and it's ironic that it's called a flow state, like how water flows. That's what I think is what's bringing down, and we're able to connect to our intuition and bring down these ideas from a place where they already exist.
I was going to bring up how it's probably related to conductivity, and I think that that goes in line with what Mari is saying with flow state. I also think that this has a lot of overlap with the alchemical metals and conductivity, like gold.
Or even Quicksilver moves.
Yeah.
It's reactive, but it's in a flow state. It's responsive, but at the same time, it's not. It's in another place.
We could even look even more metaphorically than that. We could say that the flood itself, the great flood that happens, is kind of like one of the most cross-cultural historical references that we can pull out of all of these different cultures that go back to time immemorial. And we can say that water as a memory, like Plato would say about the Greeks, that they were all frogs sitting around a pond. And because civilization itself springs up around water sources, because it's the essential component of life itself. Remember, humanity is 70% water. We are 70% water. I always remember this alien from Star Trek, I think it was in The Next Generation, says compares humans to ugly bags of mostly water. And we basically are, you know, and I always think it's funny that people talk about how communication is 70% nonverbal and that we're also 70% water. I don't know if these are just numbers that I'm just pulling out of thin air, but I also kind of see like that there's kind of an element here where water is clearly one of the constituent components of life itself, and therefore it would be natural for water to be one of those components that allows us to access some kind of memory, perhaps epigenetic in nature.
Like paranormal lore, wherever there's underwater rivers and shit, there's always like crazy more paranormal activity. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think you can draw a parallel between conductivity and communication. Absolutely, yeah.
I hope I'm not going overboard here, but that's exactly how it works in Death Stranding, the Hideo Kojima's magnum opus, as he calls it. There's this stuff called timefall in the game. It's basically whenever it rains, it causes anything that it touches to age really quickly, and it tends to cause ghosts to appear. And this world that the ghosts are coming from is related to something like an afterlife. They call it the beach. It's an intermediate phase of the afterlife, a lot like the river Styx, you could think of it. I think that's maybe what Kojima had in mind. And they end up using this beach as a form of internet, right? And it connects everyone together. And it works as a form of memory, so they can look into the ancient past to figure out what caused the last apocalypse, basically the last extinction event.
It's got a deep connection to our origins, basically, right? Like humanity, in an evolutionary Darwinian sense, crawled out of the primordial soup and to bestride the world like a colossus.
That's why we still got hiccups.
Our vagus nerve?
Yeah, from when we were swamp creatures.
Seriously?
Yeah, that's why we hiccup.
I don't know how the vagus nerve is associated with our origins in the water, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, it makes us feel like we're a lot more connected to nature, and it kind of challenges the body-mind duality thing, because humanity always likes to present itself as separate from nature. But if you take it from a Darwinian perspective, we're not separate from nature. We are, in a Neoplatonic sense, we are all one with nature.
And Hermeticism as well agrees with that.
For sure.
We are not separate from nature.
But humanity likes to privilege itself as kind of a class above nature. You could almost say almost like humanity views itself as like the philosopher king in a Platonic sense of the natural world. Like we are the exception to the rule.
In Freemasonry, there is an old saying across all lodges that they hammer into you, and it's that the universe is perfect in all ways, just not complete.
Interesting. That assumes that the world is like a puzzle that's already been assembled, but that we're just missing a couple of the pieces to finish it. But that is a very deterministic worldview, I guess you could say.
Well, heavily influenced by Hermeticism, we can also look into the continuum of Hermeticism, which states that time as we see it is bullshit. It's actually all just the snake eating its tail, I guess. It's a flat circle.
Someone once told me time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're gonna do over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's all happened before, basically. And like, I think it was Schilling, I think, who said like, or Hegel was like, great historical figures appear once as tragedy and the second time as comedy.
Yeah.
So it's like we're repeating a lot of these events in historical
archetypes.
It's
so infinite. If we began to even try to comprehend it with our like little monkey meat brains, they just explode.
I feel like that a lot when I'm doing this stuff because it's so hard for me to keep a really consistent understanding of any particular set of ideas. And then we start going on to another subject, and then you could go all sorts of different ways with that one too. So it's like, it's good to be able to have a conversation with multiple people though, because then we can hold down these ideas under scrutiny a lot easier.
Yeah, especially with people who think different too. Because like if you think about like modern science, like physics, quantum physics and stuff like that, the more advanced it gets, the more it's just like, oh, you're just talking about occult secrets that have been around forever.
Well, I wanted to address that actually, because I've kind of come up with this concept. I don't know if other people have, but I know Nietzsche kind of addressed this, but I've kind of given it a new age name for it. I'm calling it quantum occultism.
Ooh,
let's talk
So
about
it's going to
that.
be one of the articles that I'm going to write, a modern day kind of new agey mixture of like when you see people, usually they'll bring up the double slit experiment and the observer effect or Schrodinger's cat, and in order to justify kind of occult principles or ideas, and like they're kind of using science to justify these other things. Okay, so that's quantum occultism, right? However, I would say that Nietzsche already addressed these ideas a long time ago, and he called them the Hinterwelter or the backworlder. And the backworlder is essentially this idea that like it's almost like the God of the gaps argument, where back in the day, you know, wherever science doesn't have an explanation, that is where spirituality inhabits that space between spaces. And
ooh, the
essentially it's
liminal
like
spaces.
yes, exactly. And this is what Nietzsche was trying to explain to people. He wasn't saying, when he said God is dead and we have killed him, which is significant, people usually don't add the last part, which is the and we have killed him. He was talking about Darwin and science basically undermining those space between spaces. Yeah, he was basically making the spaces that God and spirituality could exist smaller and smaller because Darwin was giving so many evolutionary biological explanations that made a lot of sense, that Darwin himself kind of behaved as like the destroyer of antiquity.
Which is funny too, because the more in-depth we get, the more we realize we don't understand.
Well, that's what I was about to say, is the death of antiquity version of what God is. But the more you push, the more you learn, the more you quote unquote kill God and close the gap, as you're talking about, the wider the gap seems. It's infinity, dude. Like there's no approaching. It's like trying to find the end of the pi number. Once we calculate, I know it can happen, but we can get closer and closer and closer. But by definition,
I don't think it's possible personally.
by definition, it goes on for infinity. So we can approach infinity, but there's no way that you can actually get to that point.
I like to say you can't grasp infinity, and if you can grasp it, it's not infinity.
And if you try to claim that you can, you're probably somebody that nobody should be listening to.
But that's my argument, is that the God of the gaps, it's like the gap is going to always still be there.
Yeah.
It'll be smaller by comparison.
Think about back when in Nietzsche, in his age, I mean, everything was so condensed. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have all this connectivity. You couldn't just go out and you literally had to learn stuff by interacting with people and going to libraries. So like, it makes total sense that like the stages that they were at back then are discontinued where we are now, while still respectable.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring up Nietzsche in response to like Aleister Crowley had this concept called like the true will, and Nietzsche has an idea called the will to power, which is they're like kind of very similar but very different, because like the adding the word true to it really messes with it etymologically speaking.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you add the word true to anything, you're changing the definition of it, right? Like adding the word
it's
God
like what
to something.
version of truth are we talking about here? Like there's the macrocosmic view of truth, there's the microcosmic view of truth, and then there's like the middle view of truth, and they all hate each other.
Yeah, if Nietzsche and Darwin are correct, and Aleister Crowley also said that Nietzsche is like the messenger or the avatar of Thoth, then the message is clear. The self is a fiction. The will is a drive for power. And your rituals are merely a high-cultured aesthetic draped over a cold reality of our evolutionary descent. Basically, the backworldsman or the Hinterwelter is basically like the modern-day quantum occultist, because in Nietzsche's view, any attempt to move the self into a hidden dimension, be it a heavenly realm or a quantum field, is merely a sophisticated form of high IQ escapism, a way of hating the reality and hating flesh. So basically, Nietzsche reserved his sharpest vitriol for the Hinterwelter, those who invent backworlds, And he basically said to claim that the true will, which is Aleister Crowley's version, resides in a non-local quantum field is merely the final desperate gasp of the soul superstition. It's an admission that your will cannot survive the scrutiny of the Darwinian sun, so you seek to hide it in a spooky action at a distance.
Yeah, and then you go
And,
even deeper into Carl Jung, and it's like all of yourself is a lie, and that's why you have to dive deep to break it apart.
He would say that like all of the gods and demons and monsters are inside us, and that they're all archetypes within humanity, and that but I think the people take his perspective a little bit too far, and they try to say, well, that means that all spirituality is false. But in reality, I think Carl Jung was a hermetic thinker.
Oh, he was a
that
total
was very
occultist.
much a mystical. Yeah, he was a very much a mystical person who was having all sorts of mystical visions in the Red Book. So to claim that somehow he like invalidated spirituality or something is kind of a bad faith take about his.
No,
research.
he's just a good strategist, because when you're playing a game, you got to play on with the rules of the game. And he was really like mainstream to a certain degree, and he had to play by the rules of the game, which means he had to not tell the public that he actually did astrological charts on all his patients and shit like that, and that he was a Gnostic. Not necessarily the Gnostic that we might think, but he saw Gnosticism as like a breakdown of a spiritual, psychological, psyche breakdown of everything. It wasn't like literal. He never took Gnosticism literal. Like he didn't think there was a actual demiurge out there and shit. It was just because like Carl Jung understood that humans can't understand, and that we have to see things through interfaces and through archetypes, and that's the only way we can really comprehend things.
That's like the best lesson I've ever learned, is that you don't know everything and you never will. But that doesn't mean that you should give up learning.
Oh yeah.
Like,
that's kind of like the absurdist Albert Camus take, right? Like the absurdity of life shouldn't make you not strive, but the absurdity is like, he would say that their life doesn't necessarily have a capital P purpose, that the striving against that absurdity provides us with a kind of purpose in and of itself.
I just think it's a bit interesting to get really hung up on the English words true will, because it's quite specifically thelema, which is Greek, and that tells you what kind of truth it is, which is a divine will. And,
so it's beyond you.
Well, I mean, this is where you can get into kind of like a philosophical, like headbutting with people, because the idea that you could own divine will as something separate from the will of God is kind of false. But that's the whole point of meeting your holy guardian angel in the first place, is to align your true will with that of God, and then there's no separation. So you can kind of go in circles with this argument.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say earlier, is you guys taught me that thelema is not the surface level interpretation of it. If you go through the actions, you perform, your initiation, and you pursue your studies properly, you will come to the conclusion that the will of God is actually your own will. It's not that you are God. I mean, you are, but you're a spark of that, the source. When you're aligned with the source, then your will becomes that of God. It becomes divine will. So do as thou wilt would be a good statement, not a selfish, egoistic statement, because you're beyond ego at that point. And I never understood that until I met, Luke, and even Hecka helped me understand it in a different light, is that it's not an evil thing to say that. Thelema is not devil worship. It's not evil. It's a gray, benign thing, kind of like we were talking about the Greek demiurge earlier, where it's like a thing that exists. And you can use the tool however you want. But if you really truly understand the way the universe works, it's going to be for divine purposes.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
It's kind of the ego's job to project onto it meaning, right? So even if you have an experience of gnosis, once you come back down across the abyss, because you can't bring yourself across the abyss. It just doesn't work like that. And if you can have an experience that you experience something, it doesn't really translate into words. And we kind of went into this in the Ararita episode.
Can't say it.
It's a very human thing to project do what you want onto the idea of do what thou wilt. And I think even Crowley is guilty of doing that.
It's like the opposite. We've talked about this quite a bit. It's very similar to like how the word Islam would translate, or what it means to be a Muslim. It's like to surrender to a higher will.
I genuinely think that the Greek thelema would be more in line with stuff that we had talked about with Ma'at. Like the union of your Ka and Ba soul in Egypt would be like the union making the Ak, which would be your divine body, right? Your divine blessed soul. I think it's a lot more in line with that. So I don't know if it's helpful to get really hung up on the English translation of true. If you're not understanding it from the context of its roots.
I would just say that so the way that I used Nietzsche and Darwin to dismantle the Crowleyan argument was basically that, so Nietzsche doesn't say the traditional good and evil. In Beyond Good and Evil, he talks about the master morality and the morality of the herd. He basically says that good and evil is like a fiction. It's like a fairy tale, essentially.
Yeah.
And if you were going to put Nietzsche on a spectrum of literary people, I would say Nietzsche is more like, oh, who wrote Dune? What's his name?
J.J. Abrams?
No!
Is that wrong?
No.
Herbert Hoover.
It's Frank Herbert.
Oh,
Frank Herbert.
dude.
Yeah, there you go. Frank Herbert. Okay, so he basically had like kind of, or like Game of Thrones. It's more like a Shades of Grey. That's kind of where Nietzsche would be more so. And then you have the masters and the herd. That's why he was opposed to Christianity, because he viewed like the Homeric heroes as like the masters, and then Christianity was appealing to the slave class in Rome. So he viewed it as kind of like appealing to the weakness of humanity rather than appealing to our strengths. So I would agree that I don't think thelema is for the herd necessarily, but I would say that Aleister Crowley himself was the master, right? And the people who follow him are the herd in like a Christian sense, right?
Yeah, because Crowley
so,
is supposed to be like the prophet of thelema, right?
Right. So it's his system. And when you use his language and his system, you are allowing him to do the thinking. We are outsourcing the thinking to him when we use these systems, right? And you have to remember that systems are not just humans. From my cyberpunk philosophy, that metaphysics that I've established, basically, which is like my own school of thought, I'm relying heavily on Aldous Huxley, Alan Watts, and Gregory Bateson.
Mm-hmm.
And Gregory Bateson, from a cybernetics perspective, would basically talk about systems theory and the patterns that connect. And he would say that living systems are not just the individual, they're the individual, the ideas, and the environment that they live in. So Aleister Crowley is not just an individual, he is a system. He is a living system, and thelema is a living system.
I
have
would
so much to say.
I personally would reject that, because I think thelema would exist without there being an appointed prophet. And that's what makes me not a Thelemite as far as being into the Crowleyism part of thelema, because you can look at the Book of the Law, you can connect with it, and you can actually derive from it wisdom that is completely unrelated to Crowley as an individual person.
Agree.
So it's like you can believe, let's say, for example, in a lot of the stuff that Jesus talked about, and you can find your own gnosis experience through reading the Bible, and you might not even believe that Jesus is a real person. So that's also feasible. I'm perfectly content to throw Crowley to the side and look at the wisdom that's underlying it, and that's not probably what you're going to get talking to someone who goes to a thelemic order.
Just make sure you burn the book when you're done.
I want to square both your points together.
I don't think we're at odds. I really don't.
No, because this harkens to some other idea that we have explored on the show quite a bit. And it speaks to one of the larger parts of our audience, and that is chaos magic is more thelema than thelema. And that's because of what you're talking about. Is for some reason, when you go become a thelemite, you end up being a sheep to whatever Crowley is the wolf, right? And if you really want to do the real wolf thelema, you have to go do chaos magic. Because chaos magic is almost like if you take on the god form of Crowley in your own religion is sort of how that works. And it even functions that way as an egregore. Like Genesis P. Orge's experiences religiously were like an echo of Aleister Crowley. And even Aleister Crowley's birthing of thelema comes from like a botched chaos magic version of the Abramelin. And so I don't know how this exactly ties into what you're saying, but I got the impression through my own practice and experience that Crowley is like, you should not worship Crowley. You should go do your own version of Crowley. And that is actually closer to the real formula. Like chaos magic is a more faithful expression of what thelema was attempting to be, because you are becoming the prophet yourself, basically.
I think to speak to what you were saying about good and evil, like anytime that you are below the abyss, there's going to be that duality and a projection of your individual perspective onto it. And so you can read through the Book of the Law without Crowley, and even when it references Crowley, like it's speaking to him as my prophet, you can read that as in it's being said to the reader of the book. You can actually take Thelema without any Crowley if you want to, in my opinion.
I was going to actually bring up something I thought when you guys were talking, I actually really thought it kind of brought it all together. And it's a phrase from Alan Watts, which is the menu is not the meal. So meaning that the symbols, thoughts, and descriptions and maps are not the actual lived experience of reality, meaning that it highlights the difference between the learned experiential knowledge versus the book learning.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to get your guys' understanding of, so from my research, Crowley referred directly to Friedrich Nietzsche as almost an avatar of Thoth, god of wisdom. In his autobiographical work, The Confessions of Aleister Crowley, he held Nietzsche in extremely high regard, viewing him as a prophetic figure who anticipated the Aeon of Horus. And his categorization of Nietzsche as Thoth is actually very significant in Egyptian because Thoth is the god of the messenger god, and he's also the god of wisdom. Basically, I'm just curious, how do we square that circle if Crowley is basically saying we should listen to Nietzsche, but then Nietzsche is presenting us with a very different definition of what the Antichrist is? Like, they're both presenting us with very different interpretations, and I'm just curious, like, which interpretation you think is more reasonable, and like, how does that fit together? Like, with Crowley giving so much credit to Nietzsche, like, how does that fit together in your mind?
According to Kemetic magic, that's just basically calling someone wise. Like, that's what you do in Kemetic magic is you say, I am, and then you insert a god name because they're not deities, they're not separate things, they're aspects of nature. So it's not at odds with anything, in my opinion.
Well, I want to dig into the meat of what you're getting at, though, to answer your question. How would you see them as different? Like, just to play into what you're saying, like, how would you categorize each of those differently? Like, where does Nietzsche fundamentally disagree with Crowley? And you said, you kind of explained it as, like, if you retreat the spirit into the gap where you're unable to look at it or analyze it, you're sort of in the camp of Crowley. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I'd say, like, that's why it's not just Nietzsche. You have to remember that I'm situating Nietzsche within the Homeric heroes category as a poet like Hesiod or Homer.
Sure.
It's not just Crowley that is dethroned by Nietzsche. It's also Plato as well, because Nietzsche wanted to dethrone Jesus as well. He wanted to name himself as the Antichrist of the time period because he wanted to start the new Aeon. Essentially, that's why Aleister Crowley was probably so, inspired by his work and stuff, right? But then Nietzsche wasn't talking about himself being some type of satanic Abrahamic god. Quite the opposite. He wanted to dispense with the Abrahamic monotheism, and he even wanted to dispense with Socrates and Aristotle and Plato. He wanted to get rid of all of them and go back to the Dionysian, the old era of the Homeric hero, because he thought that that was when humanity was at its best, when we were masters of our destiny and not herd members of a flock.
So I'm not the biggest expert on Crowley, but that sounds exactly like what Crowley wanted to believe Thelema was. He wanted Thelema to be like that. He wanted Thelemites. He wanted his religion to be of that character and of that quality, that it was for the elect, and it really wasn't for everyone.
Yeah, I would say that, but also you have to remember that Nietzsche was talking about Darwin when he said, and we have killed God. He wasn't being literal, he was being metaphorical. And he was saying modern science and evolutionary biology dispensed with antiquity. And he's saying basically, you're not a star anchored in a quantum field. You are a process occurring in a biological theater. And to suggest otherwise is to prove Nietzsche's point that we are despisers of the body who would rather believe in a subatomic ghost and face the terrifying freedom of being an accidental animal in a blind universe.
I mean, at the same time when he at the same time when he wrote that, he referred to the place that he was writing it as being sacred. So it's not that Nietzsche was entirely without any kind of connection to the divine.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that. Like I said, I would put him in the Homeric category. He wanted to go back to the Dionysian. He wasn't a secularist. He wanted to go back. He was like a classicist, basically.
I mean, you have no objections from me. Kemeticism's all about syncretism. So.
Okay, so it makes sense to me why Crowley would see Nietzsche as an incarnation of Thoth because the characteristics and qualities of the Homeric hero, as you're explaining them, is very much how Crowley envisioned Thelema, especially as separate from all the other religions. It's kind of like you can have your cake and eat it too in that regard, and it's not so much about boiling down a rational answer, right? That's not the point of the religion. In fact, reason be damned for a dog is what it says. And, you know, if will turns back and asks why, then it's weakness. It's not the true will. And this is very much in alignment with like what you're talking about. And in terms of like loving the body, hating the body, and all that, the very first book of the law, the one that was channeled today, you know, one of the most important parts of the religion is that the sacrament of the religion is to take strange drugs, collect spices, essential oils, fancy houses, nice cars, but always, always unto me, which is Nuit. And Nuit is the body of stars that we all exist inside of. We're all part of the body of Nuit. So the primary sacrament of Thelema is partaking of the body and the partaking of Nuit. And I don't see like a problem here. I don't see like an incompatibility here.
I think part of the narrative is that anti-dogma itself can become dogmatic.
Any extreme is bad. Balance is the way.
Okay, no, I agree with you. I'm not trying to say that Nietzsche in a Wittgensteinian sense. Are you guys familiar with Ludwig von Wittgenstein?
No, I'm an idiot.
Okay, so Ludwig von Wittgenstein was a logical positivist from the Vienna Circle, and he basically was like an analytical philosopher, and he attempted to negate all metaphysics, essentially. So he thought that language helped us construct reality, and he basically said that if something is unsayable, then we can't say it, and we must pass over it in silence. What he meant by that was the idea that if the language of metaphysics is so convoluted and complicated and difficult, then maybe it's like that he was said, you know what, we're just going to put all of it to the side and we're going to focus on other things. And it was almost like an attempt to dispense with the pre-Socratics and their metaphysics and an attempt to just focus on the mathematical, the analytical, and the empirical. And I think that that's not what I'm trying to do, although sometimes it comes across like that. And I think a lot of people think that same way about Carl Jung as well. I'm actually a Carl Jung fan as well, done a lot of work on him. So I don't think that Carl Jung negates metaphysics or spirituality, and I don't think that Nietzsche negates spirituality or metaphysics. I'm just saying that Nietzsche presents a competing and similar yet different anti-Christ system, essentially, right? Like Nietzsche is a system, a linguistic framework, if you will. Crowley is a system, a living system, and a linguistic framework, if you will. And essentially, like, once you incorporate yourself into these living systems, you become subject to them, and you kind of take on their ideological baggage as a consequence. So I think that's kind of what the idea from Ludwig von Wittgenstein, he would say that philosophy is a ladder, and that once we've accomplished our goal with it, sometimes we must dispense with it instead of trying to bring it with us. It's almost like a very Buddhist kind of perspective, like a non-attachment. You know, like the philosopher is the citizen of all ideas, not simply the citizen of one idea.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, using your philosophy like a scaffolding. Like once you've erected the tower, you don't really need the scaffolding anymore. And the tower being like yourself, the Homeric hero, perhaps.
Right. Or the linguistic framework is the scaffolding that helps us construct ourselves, because we are the ashlar. We are the project being worked on. I think the favorite phrase from the Hermeticists is, remember, you are the alchemist.
What do you think, Mari?
Yeah.
Epstein was obsessed with that dude.
Who?
Wittgenstein.
Really?
Yeah, that's why I was like...
Well, he was obsessed with a lot of cool things.
No, it has to do with language. I was like, I do remember actually that name. I did briefly look into it.
And also Wittgenstein was a pretty evil dude who chased Karl Popper around with a fire poker over an argument at university. Yeah, so Wittgenstein was kind of a colorful character. I like to talk about him a lot. I've also written about him as well.
What a dick.
He wrote a paper called the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. And it's basically about, like I said, an attempt to negate metaphysics, but he basically failed to negate metaphysics because he's basically trying to use language to negate metaphysics, but metaphysics is beyond language, as we always talk about, right? Like truth and beauty and science are beyond language. Language is not truth. Language is not beauty. Language is not the ineffable. right? So therefore, that these ideas that are so much more, it's almost like this idea of grasping infinity, right? You can't grasp metaphysics with language. It's like experiential knowledge. The meal is not the menu. You have to experience metaphysics as well as deal with the philosophical implications of it.
This is exactly why Epstein was interested in him, because I guess they want psychic kids.
They want psychics. That's another discussion for another day. But
I'm not crazy.
I would love to have you back to talk more about Thelema and Aleister Crowley, because I want to keep talking about it. I would suggest maybe you check out the works of Oliver St. John. I have no idea what you'll think of him, but he argues that like Thelema sort of built like a dead end into its own religion, and like Crowley is not the way out. And we very much believe that on this show, more or less. At least I do. You really have to read the Book of the Law with ancient Egypt in your heart and in your mind. Otherwise, oftentimes the shit means the exact opposite. And I literally think that's what is going on in episode 4 when they're in the Death Star. They're like, if you read it literally, you get the Death Star. And then if you read it with Egyptian wisdom, you get the Force. You get the real truth.
So I basically need my Egyptian decoder ring in order to read it properly.
I mean, we did a
Yes.
Basically, yeah.
We did a whole series on the Book of the Law, if you're interested.
I'm really down to talk about it more because there's so much more we could talk about. There's a direct connection between Aleister Crowley and the Epstein gang, and we can see it. And there's even a direct connection between Epstein and the OTO today. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but you know the robot Sophia?
Yes.
The one that Saudi Arabia gives citizenship to?
Yeah.
And Ben Gortzel and him, yeah.
Okay, so the guy who's in charge of the Sophia robot is an active OTO member.
Yeah.
And
Gortzel,
Gortzel, yeah.
Yeah, and he is basically in the Epstein files, and he basically gives Epstein the option of making a robot for him with a brain download capacity. And he gives him a lot of options for having a whole brain scan lab constructed for millions of dollars. And I mean, the implication is basically that Thelema and the OTO are not directly connected to the Epstein gang, like they're separate organizations, but it seems like that Epstein was contacting OTO and the Sophia gang people because they were because he was contacting them because he knows that they're a decentralized spy network and that they operate within these liminal spaces. And then it makes sense for these two opposing parties, in a sense, to offer each other services in a spiritual sense, because that's what they're doing, because he's trying to hire everybody he can. Kabbalists, Zen masters,
Mormons,
Buddhist governments. Yeah, exactly. So
Mormons
it's like
especially.
Thelema basically, if you think about it, I wonder if Aleister Crowley and Thelema would have worked together, or perhaps Aleister Crowley would have seen Epstein and said, you know what, that guy, he maybe would have been smart enough to say, I have my system, you have your system, and there's no, like, they would have seen each other as two opposing forces, right?
Hey, bro,
and
I have a puzzle piece for you that I just think will help you form a picture for yourself. This is an important part. Like, you're calling Thelema a decentralized spy network. Whatever Thelema intended to be is whatever Scientology became. Does that make sense, bro? Like, if you go and you look at who's involved with like the anti-gravitic stuff, like who's involved with the weird psychic stuff, who's involved with like the remote viewing stuff, it all goes back to top level Scientologists like Hal Puthoff. That guy's still around, man. You got Pat Price or whatever. That guy was probably killed because he was the best CIA remote viewer. Like, he was the guy they pulled out of the Stanford Research Institute and put him on actual top secret missions. And then what did he go do? He
wasn't killed.
He gave confessions to his church, right? Because he's a fucking Scientologist.
No, you don't kill.
He gets audited.
You don't kill your best psychic. You pretend to kill him.
No, you do kill people who know too much.
Either way, they disappeared him because he was probably going through auditing. And then, okay, you want to talk about Antichrist and all the rest of it? Well, a big linchpin part of the story of Thelema is basically like Thelema was going nowhere, and then Jack Parsons comes out of nowhere, and he revitalizes the entire religion. He's a rocket scientist, and he's a bit slipshod. He's a bit rough around the edges. He's a California boy, especially for Aleister Crowley's tastes. Aleister Crowley is a bit more refined in his occultism. Well, Jack Parsons ends up falling in love with this was a spy named L. Ron Hubbard, and L. Ron Hubbard is like caught like digging through the garbage in like the Pasadena Lodge, and like so it's pretty clear that like Homeboy was sent to infiltrate Thelema, this decentralized spy network, and see if it was a threat, right, to the greater intelligence network. And what ended up happening is L. Ron Hubbard took everything he got from Jack Parsons and Thelema, repackaged it as science fiction, and then created Scientology with it. It just so happens that there's enough truth in it, even rebranded as science fiction, that it's able to produce basically the best psychic spies that the United States has access to for some reason. I don't know how it all fits together, bro.
You could say that if you go back to the Tetragrammaton and the Tetractys, and you say those things heavily influenced Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, and then you see that Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry was influenced by and influenced Hermeticism, and Aleister Crowley also had a gigantic falling out and fight in the Battle of Blythe Road with W.B. Yeats.
Yeah.
That's an important incident as well that we have to bring up. The fact that Aleister Crowley attempted to take over the Hermetic Temple,
yes,
and ended up losing that battle. And if he didn't, then all of Hermeticism would have been under the control of Aleister Crowley, and it would have been a completely different timeline if W.B. Yeats hadn't stood up and took control away from him.
That's actually what I think Star Wars is also about. I'm not even kidding.
Yes. So wait, who's Darth Vader though? Is Darth Vader W.B. Yeats or is he Aleister Crowley?
It's all there. I'll say that. I'm fairly certain that Anakin is Aleister Crowley, and he did something similar with the Brotherhood of Saturn, where he came into the Brotherhood of Saturn, he had the Book of the Law, and he's like, look, I'm the prophet of this new shit. Look at my Book of the Law. And the Brotherhood of Saturn is like, yes, you are, Crowley. Yes, you are the chosen one of the prophet, and your Book of the Law is absolutely true, and we're crowning you the fucking prophet. And the second he left the room, all the Germans were like, okay, the Book of the Law is fucking lit, but like, fuck that guy. Yeah. And they like renounced Aleister Crowley, and they just like took the Book of the Law, and then they like invented science fiction and like fucking.
They're like, he can't be in our club, but we'll take the book.
We'll take the fucking book. And so like, but this is my point: is Aleister Crowley was like always trying to take over the Jedi Order, and the Jedi Order was like, it doesn't matter if you're the best fucking Jedi we've ever seen, you cannot be in charge, bro. And he's
he's Dooku. He's Count Dooku basically.
Okay,
he's like telling us about how evil the Jedi are.
But my thing is if you're beyond duality, you're looking at both of these entities, these polar opposites, and you're saying they're the same distance away from the center or the truth than the other. So they become the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're two sides of the same coin is what you're saying, right?
Right. So we're not looking at the coin anymore. Like they're both the same distance away from the whole
The
of the
circle
coin.
completes. The snake starts to bite its own fucking tail.
So that's what I'm saying is like you can look at the theology from any, different group of people. They might have part of it right, but they could still be the same distance away from it than the other. They're both right, but they're both wrong at the same time,
Okay, so this relates to theosophy because like the core idea behind theosophy was like, oh, we have to get all the elites to be philosophers and like do all this hippy dippy religious stuff, and then the world will heal itself. And they tried to produce a world teacher, or the Maitreya, which is like Jiddu Krishnamurti, right? And Jiddu Krishnamurti, like he was like on this meteoric rise with theosophy behind him. And like Aleister Crowley wanted to be the Maitreya. He wanted to be the world teacher, and he keeps being rejected by like the Brotherhood of Saturn and by like now like the Golden Dawn, right?
But my mommy thinks I'm cool.
How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
But then here's Jiddu Krishnamurti, who's like about to receive the crown himself and become the world teacher, and he's like, absolutely, this is totally ridiculous. I reject this.
Yeah, he doesn't want it. Yeah.
I'm gonna go live in Ojai next to Aldous Huxley.
It's like if you could combine them somehow together into one entity, then maybe that would work.
So what?
But you can't have someone who rejects and someone who accepts at the same time.
Like the second this guy steps down, Adolf Hitler rises to power.
Oh.
Like it's all Star Wars, man. It's all there. Like Star Wars is not literally true, but it is true.
Metaphorically and symbolically, it's true. I agree. That's why you suck, because you like the sequel trilogy.
What?
Yeah, don't mess with that.
We're gonna mess with it.
I win 1-0.
We're gonna mess with it. Don't worry.
No, when Disney owns it, it's bad.
The egregore was capable of expressing itself, at least in those last 3 films. But that's a whole huge argument. It's a whole huge argument. I don't want to get into.
Are you gonna see the new?
My argument
Grogu
is
movie?
inarguable.
In the words of Carl Jung, I would say that our goal should be be to rekindle the light of civilization. I think his exact words are, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle the light of meaning in the darkness of mere being.
Fuck yeah.
And I think that what I'm attempting to do is basically what the Olympic runners do with the torch, right? How they run between the different cities with the lit flame and they keep it lit and they bring it with them to the next location. And I think my goal is basically that of the Olympic athletes. And when Socrates was condemned to death and they said, well, we'll give you one chance to give us another option of what you want to happen to you. And he mocked them by saying he wanted to be given free food for life by like an Olympian athlete and also been allowed to sit at the table with all of the other Olympic gold medalists for life. And it was essentially the equivalent of saying that actually, instead of the death penalty, you should just pay me for life with extra food. And it was such a mocking attempt to go after them that it really makes you realize that what we were attempting, Socrates was likening himself to an Olympic athlete, essentially, is what I'm saying, and as a joke. And I think, even though it was an ill-timed one, obviously, in the middle of his trial, and I would say that that's kind of my goal as well. It's to kind of bring this flame from the past into the future, and then light other people's torches so that they can carry on for us, so that we can find other people to carry on for us into the future. So that's kind of what my goal is here.
Fuck yeah.
Well, I think you'll find an ally in the whole rabbit.
Yeah, that sounds very much in alignment with how we feel about things. So I would really love to have you back and maybe have you choose the topic of conversation to give us a chance to marinate it and think about it. And if you would.
I hope we've had a lot of good stuff. Yeah,
Can we talk about Crowley?
I'm definitely willing to come back.
Can we talk about Crowley?
Yeah.
I know, but like focus. You know what I mean? I don't know. Whatever.
This
I love it.
Fun. I like free discussions. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, dude, you're the bomb. I hope you'll come back again. Hopefully we can talk you into it. Hopefully you had fun.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely willing to come back. I mean, this is the practice of philosophy. This is the practical version, right? You got like the book reading, but then this is actually the conversational component that you kind of need in order to philosophically flex our muscles, essentially.
I love it.
Oh yeah.
We can't always be perfect, but the goal, if we could be perfect, would be the School of Athens.
Yeah.
You can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah, and fuck beans.
Fucking they're okay with a lot of butter, let's be real.
I mean, I love beans.
I'm never gonna look at beans the same way again now.
I can't eat them now, so fuck beans.
Yeah, fuck beans.
Fuck them.
Yeah, fuck beans. Instead, you should eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew, pew, pew.
Pew.
Pew, pew, pew.
Pew pew.
Hell yeah.
Yes.